Tonight, though, I want to do something. I want to look at this question. And at the end of the last class, if you remember, I told you that or asked you when you go home to think about this question and how you would answer a question like this. What makes an atheist an atheist? And by the way, this is not the Avenger sign. This is the logo or the symbol that atheists like to use. And you'll see this in a lot of different places of their literature and different things that they've put out on the market and in public and some of their write-ups and so forth. And so that's the symbol, the official symbol, I guess, of the atheistic community. What makes an atheist an atheist? And the reason why I ask this, I always love to see what makes people tick. And I've mentioned this in class before. When I sit down with someone and do a Bible study with them, and they tell me, well, this is, and I always ask what their religious background is, because I like to get, to back up and start from, their past and get to know what the religious background is. And then I'll usually ask why. Why do you believe that? Why do you think that? And you'd be surprised just at how much you can really draw out. Some of it is because I hear this, I heard this from my mom, or it's always been that way in my family, or I heard this person tell me once and I trusted them, or this is just how I understand things. Whatever the case might be, there's a lot of different answers that probably come with that. And so I always like to ask why. Why do you believe this? In a question like this, I think it's very important that we really examine this and start to, from our own understanding with it. And it's because, a follow-up question with this, but I want to get to this and get your feedback with it. But and asking a question like this, we can follow it up with, are we typically far off of where we think an atheist's reasoning is versus where they actually are? Does that make sense? What we think, is how I think an atheist thinks, or why I might think an atheist is an atheist. Is that is it the same as why they reason it that way? Because sometimes we get pretty close, but other times we are really far off in why we think someone is thinking the way they are. And that can be really counterproductive in a discussion like this. Okay? How would you answer something like this? What makes an atheist an atheist, from your understanding?
They don't believe in God.
Okay, they don't believe in God? Why? Why do you think they don't believe in God?
They profess that.
Okay, they profess it. We want to dig deep. Why do you think they profess that?
They don't know any better.
Okay, they don't know any better. Okay, did you hear that?
No.
If you remove an authority figure, then you're not held accountable to that authority. Okay, and that's probably, that might be why they do it. And so, what you're doing is saying, in that sense, almost implying that they just don't want to be held accountable for something. And so atheism might be the easiest way to reason that, or just say, well, I just don't want there to be a God, so I can keep doing what I'm doing. And that's possible, with some people. Anything else? Why do you think an atheist is an atheist?
Well, I have a friend that grew up being told a lie his whole life, and he's an atheist because he can't believe anybody told him anymore because his family lied to him growing up.
Okay, so he
was raised something that he now knows is a lie, but he doesn't put authority on anything because he doesn't want to be lied to.
So he had a bad experience.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And that probably counts for quite a bit. One person, you have a bad experience with something, and that can really taint your output or your perception of certain things, doesn't it? Mike?
Maybe a bad experience with a Christian.
Okay. Whether, and that can be anything, couldn't it? I mean, a Christian could say something or do something that would cause them to think, well, maybe, they're hypocritical. Some people have said, well, I don't like Christianity. All they're out is for money, and they just want my money. They always ask for it. And, you go to one service, any religious service, and, and it's interesting because outside of the religious arena, it's very easy to look at someone who's religious, no matter what they are, no matter what they believe, and they say, okay, if this person does it, then this is a representation of everyone religious, doesn't it? And that can really be misleading, but that's how a lot of people will perceive it. I mean, they just think, okay, this must be all of religion, and this is why I don't want anything to do with it. What else? What do you think makes sense?
Well, I run into a lot of, because in my college classes, there's a lot of people who profess to be atheists, and many of them don't even know what being an atheist is themselves.
Okay.
They are actually agnostic. They don't know anything, and so they just call themselves atheists, and they title themselves that inappropriately. And then, if you want to get deeper, the ones who call themselves an atheist, I don't typically see them trying to fight against all the other quote-unquote gods out there. Only our God, the one true God, you can't fight against something that doesn't exist.
Isn't it interesting that you've got a community of people that are promoting nonstop literature and they have these conventions and everything of someone that they don't even believe in. Isn't that curious? They push all of this agenda for what reason? To try to prove that someone that doesn't exist, that they just don't believe in the first place. And it's not that they just want to go against him. It's that, well, we're going to show you all this stuff, and we're going to give you all this literature, and we're going to pepper these high schools and universities and everything, telling you about someone that we don't think exists. It's always been peculiar to me with that kind of a mindset. You think, well, if they just don't believe, well, then they just don't believe. But they go far, they go above and beyond this, don't they? And it goes into the schools. And then you hear this, the atheism in public schools and taught in different formats. And, we're talking about evolution, and it's taught in that format that, there's no God. And so we see this in so many different places, in so many different discussions that come up. Okay? Most of us, how many in here have known an atheist in their life? How many have known an atheist in your life? Okay. Have you ever asked them why they believe what they believe? Or is it just something that you just say, well, I guess that's just kind of what you think, and I think differently?
My neighbor, he calls himself an existentialist.
Okay.
And he believes you live and you die.
Okay.
And there's no reason for anything else.
And that there's nothing after this, right? That's just completely there's just nothing forever after this. And that, which is a common belief of the atheistic world.
We were shopping in the grocery store one day, and we talked to everybody. We can't get out of the store without talking to everybody. So we were talking to a woman online, and it came up that it always comes up that we're Christians. And she was like, well, I'm an atheist. And we asked why. And she said, because I've heard all that everyone has to say, and it just doesn't sound truthful enough to me to make me believe it.
Okay.
So as long as people don't try to press their beliefs on me, I'm good.
Okay.
But she was firm, she was an atheist because she doesn't hold enough truth for what she's been shared.
Okay. And as different as that is to us, in the Christian realm, that's probably as honest as you can possibly get, is that something doesn't sound right to her. She's probably, I'm guessing, has heard in different formats or from different various sources what religion is, or what people think religion is, and what they think God is, or how they connect to God, and it probably doesn't make sense may not make sense to her in the way that it was presented or the way that she's seen it. And that's honest. That's and getting, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to ask this question, to see if we're very far off, in what we think. Because, most of these answers tonight are things that we see from this side, don't we? We've never, has anyone in here ever been an atheist or came out of atheism? Not one hand, which doesn't surprise me. But it also doesn't surprise me that we get the answers that we did tonight, because we're looking at it from this side of it, aren't we? Because we don't understand. We can't jump in the mind of an atheist. We've never walked in their shoes. We've never reasoned to, from that side of it. And so what we might think, why we think an atheist might be an atheist, might not necessarily be why they did it. And I want to get to kind of with where I'm going from this. I want to introduce you to someone, Forrest Antomasaris. So Forrest is a really good friend of mine. He was actually one of my students at the Florida School of Preaching when I taught there. Forrest came out of atheism. He's now a gospel preacher. He works with a publication called The Daily Apologist, in fact. And but not too long before he came to preaching school, he reasoned himself out of atheism. And he was a lifetime atheist. Never believed in God, always tried to, he would argue with his Christian friends, and then he met a Christian girl, and she started talking to him, and he started asking questions, and started asking other people, and more he reasoned. And he was kind of a classic case of someone who went in with the intention of just upending Christianity and upending the Bible, and ended up getting converted out of it because he just could not find, as much as he tried to reason, he just could not find it. And you'll find that a lot in, with different atheists that have turned to either religiously thinking. Now, some of them don't go far enough. Some of them just say, well, I'm just going to be religious and I believe in God, but that's about it. But some of them go further. And they want to know, and they sincerely and honestly pursue the truth. And with an honest mind, they're going to do this. Okay, so I was talking to Forrest, and he's put a lot of really good stuff, a lot of good material out. But I asked him this question: when you were an atheist, what was your biggest hang-up of why you felt that you could not approve of God? Atheists get a lot of questions. What do you think the number one question of an atheist is, or to an atheist? There's a question they probably get asked 99% of the time. It's probably the first one that they get asked.
What happens when you die?
Okay, that's not it, but that's a good question. Most of them get asked, what made you decide to believe in God? And we're going to get to that in just a few minutes, but I wanted to take the opposite route. I wanted to know because I wanted to jump inside his head. I want to know from an atheist perspective, what made you, what compelled you so much to say, I cannot believe that there's a God, or I can't approve of God, and what's the biggest hang-up? So it was really interesting with his answers, because his answer was threefold. He said there's three main reasons why I, could not believe it. And I don't think he's been asked the question a whole lot, because he's always asked, as I said to begin. But here's the first one. He said, for me personally, he says it really came down to three key reasons. These are what I want to kind of discuss tonight, and kind of hit on each one, because I think that there is scripture that we can really, that can help us reason, to answer, or help us answer from an atheistic perspective. Now, it's hard sometimes because an atheist doesn't believe in the Bible, and so the moment you say, well, I'm going to take you to Genesis, or I'm going to take you to John, or I'm going to take you to here, is it going to do a whole lot of good? No. Why? They don't believe in the Bible. But if you can reason stuff from the Bible, and just not tell them this is where it came from, but use the reasoning of the Bible to help, maybe there can be a breakthrough, like there was with Forrest. But he says, for me, it came down to three key reasons. The first reason is how I perceived religious people and Christians in general to behave and act. And I think someone said that before. From the stories of the Inquisition to Catholic priest scandals, to mega church preachers who swindle people, to the marginal Christian who is mean or judgmental, as I learned more about who a Christian really is according to the Bible, and started thinking about how people poorly reflecting God doesn't impact God as much as I thought, those started to ease, but that was one. So pause right there, because you've got a couple of things at play right here. So he's looking at, first off, he says how I perceive religious people and Christians in general to behave. What do you think he meant by that?
My brother tells me that because I'm a Christian, no matter how
Okay.
I begged him to. I said, please, 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 come down here. I'll tell you the name of my elders. But he perceives that we are to behave, like be forgiving and good at all times and not make any mistakes. And if we stumble, then we're not a Christian.
Okay. So so we're almost judging. We're judging them like they're judging us, aren't we? The two sides are ultimately judging, and there has to be judging to some extent. To call sin a sin there has to be judgment there. To say, we look in the Bible and it's, to know that there is a deviation from the law that Christ gave to us, that's judgment. That's saying you aren't doing what Christ says. But when he talks about this, he's saying, all of a sudden he's looking at this and he's saying, well, this is how people have treated me. This is how I've seen Christians behave and I've seen Christians act this way, and therefore I could not accept that. And then he goes on and says, from the stories of the Inquisition to the Catholic priest scandals, and so he's looking at that, and he's, and you notice how he's lumping all of this together, which I mentioned before. That's what he was doing. Because someone who's outside of Christ, they're looking at all of this stuff that's called religion, and that's how they're reasoning. That's how they're perceiving everything. They're not breaking it up. They're not saying, well, this is this religious group here, which is not reflective of this one over here, but each one, it's just this big, huge pool of all this religious turmoil going on, and that's how he looked at it, and that's how he reasoned, which is probably not far off from most of the atheists. So he looks at these scandals, he looks at the megachurch preachers who swindle people, the marginal Christian who is just mean and judgmental. So again, he's saying, okay, here's these people that are, just conning people out of all this money on TV. And then I meet the ones that I can meet, because he's not going to meet the megachurch preacher per se, but he's going to meet other religious people. And all of a sudden he sees that they're mean and judgmental and, telling everyone that they're going to go to hell if they don't. I remember, just as kind of an example, there were some really derogatory things being thrown out when I was at the Winter Olympics in 2002. It came through Salt Lake, and that's kind of the last time that I lived in Utah. But there were people out there with religious signs and everything, and it just said, and all kinds of things that they had on these signs that were just stifling to me. God hates this person, and God hates this person. God hates this group, and God hates these people, and God hates, and I'm thinking, and they just would go around yelling all of these things. But you think of someone who might not be religious, who's looking at that, curious about it, and that's the only thing that they hear. How do you think they're going to respond to it? How easy does that make it when someone who really cares about them, who wants to get them to heaven, who really does want to sit down and be compassionate with them and everything, how hard is it, or easy do you think it is for that person to come and talk to them? How open are they going to be?
They just made it harder.
They close doors, don't they? Those people that were out there just burned every bridge that they could possibly imagine to try to reach someone who might be lost. And those people are just as lost as the ones that they think they're condemning. And so that's what he was, that's how he was judging him as well. But he said, as I learn more about who a Christian really is according to the Bible, how important do you think that is? We're going to have differences with atheists, aren't we? But imagine, instead of just saying, well, you know what? You're wrong, and you're a heathen, and you just, how dare you not believe in God? Imagine if we could just turn that around and start asking questions and just letting them see who we are and how we operate and what we do. And that while some religious people might be like that, imagine them looking at someone and having it consistent with the behavior. Look over at Matthew chapter 7. Because I think this is very telling. This are the words of Christ right here. Matthew chapter 7, beginning, in verse 15. Christ says, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves. And how will you know them? You will know them by their fruits. What does that mean? But what is it? The way they behave? Reactions? What did you say? Their actions. Okay. Their actions and reactions, I guess, but what else? When you look at that word with fruits, you will know them by their fruits.
The results of their actions.
Okay. The results of their actions, because what he's doing here is he's comparing these, isn't it? There's a contrast right there. He says, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they're ravenous wolves, and you will know them, these ravenous wolves, by their fruit. You're going to know what they do, and it's not going to take very long by how they behave and what they say and how they act towards certain people, right? You see someone consistently hostile towards another individual who doesn't believe the same thing that they do, and how likely do you think you're going to be of getting a Bible study out of it? If all they hear you say is, well, you don't believe this, and this is what I think you believe, and this is what I think and that's why there's almost that barrier, which is why I asked this at the beginning of class, is how we think, why they are like they are. Is it very far, am I very far off in thinking that? And it's surprising when you start to realize, because it was an eye-opener for me when I talked to Forrest for the very first time. And we had this discussion a long time ago. I just asked this question to him recently, but because it was the same for me. I was never in atheism. I had friends that were, but I never asked them why. But then I finally got to ask him, and he was, it's interesting what you find out and how you change your own perception of dealing with certain people and certain things, because it's not always the same. I don't, and that really kind of hindered trying to make a breakthrough with anything, because you just already are thinking things that aren't, and then when it's not the same as what theirs is, then they just close down, and there's really, you don't get very far. And so he says, you will know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Even so, every good tree bears what? Good fruit. But a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. And every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire, and therefore by their fruits you will know them. And so, while we see all the bad fruits and what makes them that bad fruit, are they going to be able to tell us, whether they won't be looking at it as, hey, that's good fruit, because they're not going to look at it in a scriptural way, but can the principle certainly be seen? Are they going to notice if you're just condemning them all the time or judging or whatever the case might be? Now, there comes a time when we have to stand up, and I get that. But if we're trying to reach someone who's lost, how do we do it? What can we do as Christians to prevent this kind of a presumption?
Well, the people you're talking about that are constantly saying God hates, they're fighting the battle for their own side. They're spewing Satan's hate instead of God's love. We have to show God's love.
Absolutely.
If we show God's love, people will see the difference.
What
I
are
had coworkers say, this person says they're a Christian, but I know that they're not supposed to act like that. So, sometimes people know. They see the difference.
right? Are they going to notice? I mean, with someone who is, who displays that kind of love versus someone who obviously is just condemning and attacking and aggressive and all sorts of things.
Just, snide and kind of quietly backstabbing or.
Right.
I mean, people see those little things too, the way Satan attacks us.
It just takes one snarky comment, doesn't it? I mean, that's really all it takes before and it could just flip someone right off and they don't want to do anything. They don't want to, and they won't say anything. What else? What can we do as Christians to prevent this?
I think he has a good point there. Until he learned, according to the Bible, what Christian was, I think that actually gives us a leg up versus other denominations, because this is where you get to lay the groundwork. Let me show you why not only they've got it wrong, but let me show you with the Bible what it's supposed to look like.
Right.
So that you can know that those who are professing to be Christians and acting this way, this is your refutal against God. Those aren't even from God's church.
Right. What's really interesting, and you kind of just got me thinking in this way. When you look at, because some of the responses tonight, and it's how I've thought of it as well in the past, and we tend to think of someone, well, if they're an atheist, then they are just, they're mean and they're callous and they just don't believe in God and they don't do this. And yet, I've met some really nice atheists who have a great personality, who are very likable, and you probably would never even know they're an atheist until you start talking to them, and they tell you that they don't believe that. And they can be nice and all other, nice and giving and sweet, and imagine that kind of a personality meeting a religious personality that's completely the opposite of that. And why would they want to listen to anything else?
Well, the other thing is that we're all going to make mistakes. So we're all quite capable of being that negative person.
Oh, absolutely.
Turn someone away from Christianity. It's so important to be willing to be humble and apologize. I've heard of people that don't apologize, like, to their young children, because they're young children.
Right.
I'm their parent. But, I make mistakes, and Josiah has known that since he was tiny, because we want him to know that we make mistakes, we apologize, and we grow from it. And we have to be willing to apologize to people.
Imagine them being able to see stuff like this. And they don't almost get into our homes, but to see how we interact with our children. But imagine them being able to see the love of Christ, to see just who Christ is and how he acts, even if they don't believe in Christ, because we don't have to tell them, hey, guess what? I'm a Christian. This is how I'm acting. This is, notice this. Just act that way, and just be a Christian, doing Christian things, and they're going to catch on, and it's going to be much more beneficial. I want to get to these before we run out of time right here. Here's the second thing that he said. That the second was the idea of God himself, or at least how I thought he was described, was immoral. If God commanded the Canaanites to be slaughtered, will torment people in hell forever, etc., how can I approve of that? But of course, I fail to understand the context around that, how serious sin is, holiness and justice, and so on. Is God just or unjust? We know him as just, don't we? But if that's all he's told, and he just hears these stories that God's just going to kill these people, and God's just just full of wrath in the Old Testament, and you just want to kill all these individuals, then why, and you don't know anything else about God except for what you've been told of all the vengeance, then that's probably the outlook you'll have of him, isn't it? Without exploring God any further in Scripture. Thankfully, he did that. How do we know God is just? Okay. Look at Matthew chapter 5. Which is really interesting because I don't hear this from a lot in the world today. This is Christ again, giving these life lessons. He says, you have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Well, that's what the world says, doesn't it? That's probably what they're used to saying. But I say to you, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you. And pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you. Look at this right here. This is the key. That you may be sons of your Father in heaven, for he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good. Is God just going to look at one person and say, well, this is what he's like, therefore I'm just going to favor him over another individual? He doesn't do that, does he? I'm being judged as much as anyone else is being judged, as much as anyone else is being judged. And we're all in this, aren't we? Every one of us is being judged for the things that we do that are good and not good. But he says that the sun is going to rise on the evil and on the good and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. And so we know that God is not going to, he's not going to favor one. Now, he does favor those who are in Christ, doesn't he? Those who respond to him. But he's not going to just say, hey, you've done some good things. I'm not going to judge you as harshly as I'm going to judge someone else. Every one of us are being judged in the exact same way. And it's expected of us to do things to be in Christ the exact same way, is it not? And so we're able to look at this and know, Christ isn't going to, hold this. But, all he did was look at it, and it's, he's not the first person that all he thought was just, well, God just wants to, kill all the Canaanites and do away with all these people in hell. But why? When you start looking at it, what puts them there? Is it God? They're choices. God doesn't make them do what, make the choice they made. God sets the standard, but he gives us the choices, doesn't he? I mean, how interesting that is, that God is blamed for so much when he's not the one that did it. Did God make Eve and Adam eat that fruit in the garden? No. He told them what the consequences would be. He gave them every chance. He threw them a softball pitch, didn't he? Saying, look, you can have every tree except that fruit right there. You can have anything, the run of the whole garden except for that. Don't eat that. Don't eat that. And what does Satan do? Comes along and he says, hey, guess what? Eat that one. That's going to do something for you. That's going to make you as smart as God. God didn't make them eat it. But they did it, didn't they? God doesn't make anyone do it. But it's interesting as he goes through that he started to understand that God is just, that he's not this tyrant. And once you start reading about him and investing the time in reading about him, you find out really how loving of a God he is. He wants to save people way more than he wants to destroy them, doesn't he? He didn't want to destroy Canaan. He didn't want to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. He didn't want to destroy, all these places. But what kind of places were they? What kind of people were they? What did they think of God? They hated him. We see a lot of atheism in the Old Testament in the idolatry. Now we see polytheism where people try to incorporate the God and just kind of absorb him to all the gods that they already believe in. But we also see how they rejected God and they just wanted to go to all these false gods. And that, in a sense, is atheism towards that God of Israel. They don't want to believe in that God of Israel. They don't want to believe that he existed. But he did. Getting to the third thing, he says, for me, was I really thought the idea of God in general was incoherent and just a mental crutch for the weak or an invented story used to control people. How many thought that, have heard that in your discussions with an atheist? That it was just a mental crutch? Not many of us, have we? Not very close to what we think, and this is how he's thinking. This is how an atheist thinks. But as I dug into it, I saw that it was, in fact, the opposite. So what can we do? What can we do to make sure that someone doesn't think that of God, or that God's not just some mental crutch? Is there something we can show? Something we can... Did you have something, Sabrina?
No, we can just make sure that we're in our daily lives reflecting God in all that we do, everywhere we are, and we don't differ no matter where we are.
Okay. Show them that he's not, that he can build us up and that we can be strong.
Talk about the church and our relationship with it.
Okay.
And make a big difference. The difference even between, I have to go to church and I can't because I go to worship God at that time. They're little things, but they are things
It's interesting, just those little words with how we say things, isn't it? I have to go to worship on Sunday, or I get to go to worship on Sunday. Because we don't think anything of it, do we? I tell someone, if they ask, hey, do you want to go here on Sunday, or want to go to a game, or you want to go camping, you want to go whatever it is, and a lot of people will say, well, no, I have to go to worship on Sunday. I have to go to church. How does that sound, do you think, to someone who isn't church-minded? Right. But imagine how you can turn that around and show them just how important it is to you, and and then maybe open up a discussion. I know we only have a few minutes left. There's a second question that I asked Forrest with this, and I want to get your intake as well. Why do you believe in God? How many people in here know who Ricky Gervais is, the actor? Okay, Ricky Gervais has done a lot of, he's a comedic actor. He's done a lot of different things, movies that you've probably seen him in, just maybe not recognize the name. Ricky Gervais, though, is very vocal in his atheism. And he's been on a number of talk shows talking about how he doesn't believe in God, but he once did. In fact, there was a time in his life when he was very religious. He went to Bible classes. He was very active in the congregation. He was brought up in a very religious home, and he loved it. And he said until one person came to him and his brother, and they asked them that question. And he said that is the question that made him turn to atheism, because he tried to fumble with this question, and he said, I could not answer it. A question that seems easy, but then he said, the more I thought about it, the more, why do you believe in God? If I was to ask you here, why do you believe in God? You're a Christian. Why do you believe in God? What would you say? Because what? I know it's the truth. How? Why do you think it's the truth?
Because of science.
Ah, okay. So you're going to bring science into this discussion. DJ?
From the experiences that I've had, the pieces that I've read, and the history of the Bible itself versus what we've gained knowledge of later. So
we know that what they found with the Bible has been authenticated, and okay. I'll let me show you what he has, and then we can expand this until this bell rings. This is what it was kind of a lengthy answer with him, but this is what he said. I think that scenario with Ricky Gervais demonstrates how badly the church needs to be well-versed in apologetics and Christian evidences. Now, I would say that I believe that God exists because design demands a designer, fine-tuning demands a fine-tuner, moral laws demand a moral lawgiver. We are surrounded by instances and evidences of design, fine-tuning, and moral laws. I believe in God because there must be something that exists, transcending the temporary and material, that is powerful enough to design the world, smart enough to design the world, and a personal being whose personality is stamped on our own understanding of right and wrong. I believe in God because Jesus Christ revealed him perfectly in his provable resurrection, which is a great proof right there, from the dead, demonstrates once and for all that God does exist, Jesus is his son, and that he loves us very much. Oh, that's a mic drop right there, isn't it? That's a mouthful, but you think of where this is an atheist who is now answering a question like this. This isn't a Christian answering a question like this. This is a former atheist saying, this is what made me switch, and here's why. I mean, you can just hear the precision in something like this, don't you? I want to show you something real quick. I know these guys are ready to come in. Jeffrey Dahmer, you're probably familiar with. Jeffrey Dahmer, during his prison time, he converted to Christianity. He was baptized, became a member of the Lord's Church. But this is what he said when he was interviewed on television as to why he did what he did. He said, if a person doesn't think there is a God to be accountable to, then what's the point of trying to modify your behavior to keep it within acceptable ranges? That's how I thought anyway. I always believed the theory of evolution as truth, that we all just came from the slime. And when we died, that was it. There is nothing. And so he said exactly, I think someone said it earlier, he did not believe in a God. And when you do not believe in a God, You can literally try to justify anything. He thought everything that he did, that there was nothing wrong with it, because he did not believe that there was a God to be accountable to. That is how far atheism has gone. And that's what is, that's how really messed up, it can become. But as you look at, as we, start to look at this and digest, what makes an atheist an atheist? Try to get on that, try to get those discussions of climbing in, onto their side, climbing into their head, ask them those questions, get those discussions going so that you can understand. And you'd be surprised at just what kind of a conversation you can have that can open it up for future things. I know we're out of time right here. Appreciate everyone's input, and we will start this new series next week.